Welcome back to Summerween. It's 104 degrees because it's so hot. We're doing hot movies. No. Hot. Hot shit.
Hot movies.
Let's start that over. No, start it.
No, it's fine.
No, I'll go back.
Hot movies.
It's only funny.
Hot
to you
movies
and me.
and horror weather.
No, let's start over. Welcome back to Summerween. It's 104 degrees because it's so hot outside. We're doing hot weather and horror movies all summer long. All right. So what movie are we talking about today, Cam?
Today we are looking at a classic. We did this last year and it was sort of daunting and fun and exciting. This year we are looking at the 1975 classic Jaws.
You made it sound like we did Jaws last year. We didn't do that. We did other classic movies
We
last
do Jaws
year.
every few weeks.
We just keep revisiting over and over. Nah, we did some classic movies last
We
year.
did the original Nosferatu last year. That's what I was thinking
Yes,
of.
yes. But here we're doing, this movie's almost 50 years old now, which is crazy.
Right.
Like that's in my head, the 70s are still 30 years ago. It's very hard for me to wrap my head
But
around
this
these
doesn't
things.
feel old. This
No.
doesn't feel dated or inaccessible in the least.
No, not at all. Yeah, this is Jaws. We've both seen this movie many times, but for me, it'd been a while since I'd seen it. I don't know when the last time you saw it was.
Oh, it's been a long time.
Yeah, but so we were like, okay, let's rewatch it. Let's do it. Let's do a proper, fun summer horror movie.
Shout out to our dads. This is the ultimate dad movie.
This is the
We're
ultimate
doing this one
dad
for you.
movie. This is for the dads. I loved rewatching this. It was so much fun.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
I have a point that I think is a good note to start on.
Sure,
here.
let's do it.
So we're doing this as part of Summerween, which is our big summer horror series, and there is maybe not a more perfect summer horror film than the original Jaws.
Truly.
But the question I wanted to start with, which is sort of how we both started our notes here, is if Jaws is a horror movie, then what kind of horror movie is it? Mm-hmm. And I have an answer here that I want your thoughts on.
Okay.
Because my answer is that it's sort of complicated. Because as I was thinking it over after we finished watching it, the movie morphs through multiple subgenres of horror. So I don't think there's one clean answer to it, but this is my idea about sort of the sequence that it takes, the movements through subgenres. The movie starts as a slasher.
Totally.
You get a couple quick little palette cleansers, a little tone setters, a head wig blowing up. You get a couple little
immediate
little
kill
openings
at the beginning. Yeah.
Right. You get the woman in the water, and then you get the kid later. And the kid
Also,
is more of the head wig moment.
Yeah, sure. The woman in the water might be the scariest kill of the whole movie.
It's real good.
It's a freaky opening scene. Mm-hmm.
So it starts almost like the original Halloween. Obviously, this is before that, but as far as slashers go, you think of Halloween before you think of Jaws. So yes, I think it starts as a slasher to sort of set the tone. And then it recedes into this like societal horror where it's all about the people and the mayor and should we close the beaches and all the different motivations stopping that from happening. In that way, it becomes something more like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery.
Oh, okay.
Where it's definitely societal horror.
Yeah.
And then it changes again and it becomes this like lore-based creature feature. Almost, and my first thought was to think of other creature features.
Sure.
But the more I chewed on this, I think it ascends into almost Lovecraftian territory.
Oh, okay.
There are these moments that stuck out. Like I'm calling this a lore-based creature feature. Yes, the creature is the shark, but the lore becomes so important because he doesn't have the internet. We see him flipping through these books.
Yeah.
And then we get this almost spoken word history of sharks from these different characters and experts we meet along the way.
So you're comparing it to like when people like scroll through the internet and learn about the backstory of the demon and all that. That's kind of what you're thinking about.
It feels Lovecraftian because the shark becomes this otherworldly figure that we get like glimpses of from ancient texts.
Yes.
But it's never concrete. And the more we learn about it, the more mythical it becomes.
Well, and he also like points out how long sharks have been on the earth to his wife. And so, so having this ancient creature that's been around. Yeah, that's great.
Brody learns that sharks could be thousands of years old and we don't totally know. This shark, as we see it more, we get more glimpses of it. It seems so much bigger and so much smarter than any shark that even Quint has ever encountered. It grows bigger and bigger in our minds while remaining unseen. And that's the other Lovecraftian thing is you never really see the monster, or if you do, it's just little suggestions and glimpses.
Yeah, which we all know is because of like malfunctions on the set, but it was such a beautiful thing that happened because it made it so good.
It's accidentally Lovecraftian, which makes it that much more mythical and powerful. So by the time we actually get some good shots of its face at the end, it feels so awesome and unknowable. It becomes this monolith more than it is just a big scary fish. And then things change again. As this like reputation inflation is about to hit a breaking point, the guys get drunk and start telling each other war stories.
Yeah.
They all get spooked out at night. Everything gets very serious, very deadly. And that's the moment where the boat, the orca, becomes a haunted house.
Oh,
and I think the last phase, the last horror kind of movement of Jaws is that it becomes a haunted house movie.
Well, exactly, because they're like, not only because of the way that the boat acts as like a house in that way, but like it's the isolation.
Yes.
Like that's what's so good about haunted house horror, which we talked about before, is that it's in one location and like that's all you have to work with. They're out in the middle of the ocean surrounded by nothing. It's just them in that boat.
Right. And instead it engages that fear of the dark that's so important for haunted house movies, instead of just having the scary inky blackness of the night sky out the windows. You are looking through windows, but it's the endless expanse of the ocean.
Yes.
And they're in this little one-room house that's floating at sea.
Yeah.
It engages all of those ideas, and we even get a few ghosts to complete the haunted house.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, earlier, we get that kind of jump scare corpse on that wrecked boat that they
That's
recognize.
like one of the scariest things I've ever seen.
It's very good.
Love it.
But I also noticed that when Hooper goes under the water and in the cage that breaks, he disappears.
Yeah.
Like not only does he drop down and hide under the cage, he
You don't
disappears
see him again.
Right, he disappears from the narrative. So he's kind of this spectral presence. We don't know if he's going to sweep in and save the day. We don't know if he's just dead and gone into the infinite ocean.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, it turns into a haunted house and even has some ghosts at the end.
And even the ghosts of like talking about the story of the Indianapolis, the ship and the massacre, basically that Quint experience. Like that feels like bringing up ghosts and the dead.
Them comparing all of their injuries and bites on their bodies, it reminded me a little bit of Paranormal Activity.
Oh,
because you never see the thing, ever. It possesses one of the characters in the final scene, but before that, you just see these moments of someone's leg is being pulled, and when they investigate it later, all you see is bite marks and scars and bruises.
Totally.
And that's obviously the ultimate haunted house movie.
Yes.
I loved the way it engaged and flirted with all of these different horror subgenres. It made the movie feel so complete and smart. That's kind of what struck me this time.
Yeah.
Because the first couple times you watch it when you're a kid, it scares the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go in the water anymore.
Right.
Watching it now, after a while away as an adult, I was really struck by the script and the direction.
Right, yeah. Well, and it's one of those movies that I found it doesn't really feel like a horror movie. Like there are moments of horror, absolutely. That first opening scene, the scene with the head and other parts where the shark is attacking. But for the most part, it's just like a drama about a dude going through this moral dilemma and like trying to save this community and like tackle his own fears and doubts about himself, right? Which I think we can get into. But so it doesn't feel like a horror movie, and yet it's so scary. And what I really liked about rewatching this was sort of reflecting on how this movie has hit me over the years.
Oh, okay.
I first saw this movie when I was 12, and actually it's very funny. I watched it in one of our listeners, Audrey, who I have known since I was a kid. I watched it in her house. I was remembering that as we were watching. I was like, I watched this. So shout out to Audrey. I watched this in your basement by myself. I don't know why. I was like, when you're 12, you're like, I want to experience like adult things.
True terror.
And I was like, I've never seen this movie. We have it on DVD. I've got this little TV in my room.
Yeah.
It's too complicated to explain why I was in her house. It doesn't matter.
What does primal fear feel like?
And so I watched it in this basement by myself, and it absolutely ruined me.
Yeah.
Especially the scene with the head underwater.
Oh yeah.
That was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. Even the opening scene, I was like, oh, this is really, really scary. And so of course it like ruined me and made me never want to go in the water again. But then when I would watch it when it was on TV, when I was like an older teenager and young adult, I was like not scared of it at all. It was more like, because that was when I was in my like, I've always loved animals. I've always loved wildlife. Right. Like I'm a big Steve Irwin girly. Like that's my whole identity. Right. But especially in like high school, early college, like I was really like, I still am, but like back then I was really passionate about wildlife and conservation. So I was like, I had the Shark Week mentality of, oh, these creatures are misunderstood. We shouldn't be afraid of them. Like still like I wouldn't want to be in the ocean with a shark. But I was like, at that point I was like, I would like go into a shark cage and like swim with sharks, like because they're so cool and amazing and that'd be really fun. And now I am at the point where I have this incredible amount of respect for sharks in the ocean, meaning I will never go into the ocean ever again. Like we were on Cape Cod last month. This last month, and I was at the beach and I went ankle deep, and that was as far as I needed to go.
Right.
Like, why would you swim in the ocean? That's absolutely terrifying to me now.
You've evolved to the point where you can enjoy a damn good lobster roll.
Yeah.
And then hide as far away from the ocean as you can.
Never ever go into the water.
There's nothing worse than the water.
And so I found myself watching this movie like totally terrified of the idea of a shark in the water, like of swimming and you don't know what's under you and this thing coming up. Like the scariest thing to me is seeing shots, like seeing footage of sharks when they're so deep in the water that you can't see them and they're coming up and they just appear and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Like that's the scariest thing in the world to me. And so like watching this, I was like, yeah, this is scary.
You can never feel safe in the water because like the animal instinct whenever there's a horror movie villain is to kind of back yourself into a corner so you can focus on like a limited range of vision and possibilities for danger. There is no corner in the ocean. You can't see anything in any direction, but anything could get you.
Yeah, totally.
It's terrifying.
And so I remember when I was a teenager and like when I started to learn about the history of this film and how much it terrified people when it first came out, I was like, everybody's like a baby. Like this is not that scary. And now I'm like, oh yeah, no, I get it. The ocean is terrifying. Like as I get older, I just become more and more aware of my own mortality, I guess, and I'm more afraid of things than I ever was, oddly enough. So like watching this, I was like, yeah, this is a really scary concept, especially like in the 70s, before Shark Week, before all of the like awareness about conservation efforts and how magnificent and amazing these creatures are. Like they were just this unknown thing. And so, yeah, of course it's going to be absolutely terrifying.
I want to jump off of that too, because I was really struck this time by Jaws, not just as a shark movie, but particularly as a horror movie. And obviously Jaws has this classic John Williams score.
Yeah.
And that's what most people associate as being the horror of the movie. But I think there's a deeper, almost exceptional horror sensibility throughout the film.
Okay.
For example, most of the tension of the movie isn't from the score. The score is fairly restrained.
It is,
the tension that builds as you think the shark might be nearby is all in the editing.
Sure,
it's all in the editing, the cuts, the speed, that power of suggestion, the Lovecraftian thing that we talked about before. It's truly troublesome. But beyond all that, and more on a script level, there's this fantastic sleight of hand trick that's being done throughout the movie that sort of acknowledges and then obscures genre conventions. Put more plainly, there's no Gandalf. There's no Gandalf to die at the end of Act 1. Yeah. The movie knows that you're doing that kind of math while you're watching it, looking for the invaluable expert who can pass us some essential information and then neatly be killed off.
Yes, right.
But instead of following that obvious formula, Peter Benchley in the novel and then in his adaptation of his own novel here in the screenplay, he introduces Brody as the invaluable expert. The first real character that we meet is so much smarter and more focused than the rest of the bumbling townspeople and beachgoers.
Sure, yeah.
But then Hooper shows up, and then he's the invaluable expert. And just as we're settling into that dynamic, Quint shows up.
Yeah.
And he's this wild card, grumpy drunk, but increasingly, as the movie goes on, he's also the true shark whisperer expert.
Right.
So by the time we send these three guys out to sea together, they're all essential.
Totally.
There's no clear Gandalf or Obi-Wan that we can kill off. Anything can happen.
Right.
It's an incredibly deft and exciting way to set the table for the film's third act.
It's also pretty bold to like set up this really important trio of people, but they don't come together as a trio until the third act. Like you introduce Quint in the beginning, but then he's just off screen for like the whole second act, right? And you see Hooper and Brody sort of form this duo and this complicated friendship and partnership, and that grows, and that's a great relationship to watch on screen. But then Quint doesn't come in until the end, but he's so like iconic on screen and has such a presence that it works just fine.
And he has complicated relationships with everyone as well.
Yes, right.
There's an interesting kind of obscureness in a lot of those relationships, but the point of mine you hinted at jokingly earlier, I want to jump to now.
Yeah.
Because I do think horror, and in every horror movie operates on its own terms here, I think they all need a reference point. I was reminded when I was thinking about this movie afterwards of a quote from Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath, where he was answering a question of why are there all these like little quiet songs mixed in with the heavy stuff on the early Sabbath albums? And he said that there's no darkness without light, basically. That you need the contrast within that work of art to give it range and depth. For the heavy stuff to mean anything, you need the quieter moments to balance it out. For example, the Ball and Biscuit song, the White Stripes song, which is such a heavy, thrashing, bluesy guitar solo number.
If you haven't heard that, you've got to look it up right now. Pause the episode and go listen to that song.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And if you just pull it up on a streaming service, it's fantastic. But if you hear it in the sequence of the album, it comes after these 3 achingly quiet and personal songs.
That's right.
So then when it comes in with this low hum and you hear the electric guitar start to buzz and bumble in the beginning of the song, it means something. And they're perfectly curating where you are as you come into that experience. And Jaws has that same kind of control over tone and positioning of the audience.
It's a very restrained movie, which is really... It could be going absolutely ham, which I think is something the sequels do.
Sure.
But it's very restrained, which makes those moments feel more intense.
But that reference point, that point of contrast throughout the movie that it can then upset and turn over the apple cart later, the point of reference is Brody. And he struck me this time after watching the movie as being remarkably similar to George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
Let me lay that out for you.
I felt that too. I was getting such strong It's a Wonderful Life, like little vibes coming through.
Both characters are presented to us at face value and remain there. Meaning they're introduced to us, they just walk on screen as guys. Good guys who try to do the right thing and agonize when they don't or can't.
Yes.
There's something aspirational about that presumption. There's a lack of that modern day sort of cynicism and grumpiness to it. It's a remarkably unjaded film.
Yes.
Even when it gets into the sort of hyper-capitalist critique that we'll get to in a second.
Well, I was going to say they're both really touching on that.
But that's not jaded either.
No.
In the same way it's presented at face value as pure, unadulterated evil in It's a Wonderful Life, there's a moral clarity to the film that I found very pleasing.
And it presents the possibility that can be overcome. It's not just, capitalism has destroyed the world. But sucks to be you know?
But when you have a main character who's just good, he's just a good guy who's trying to do the right things, horror follows very naturally from that aspirational setting.
Sure.
You have all the horrors of the world, the problem of evil plaguing these good men like a shadow. So like George Bailey, Brody has a family. Pointedly, he's like the only person in the movie who does have a family.
That's true, yeah.
He has a couple extremely polite and manic freakout scenes when he's screaming at Quint after Quint smashes the radio and he keeps screaming, "You're certifiable, you know that? You're certifiable, you know?" It was totally George Bailey. I loved it.
Very Jimmy Stewart.
It was a great smile that took off the tension for a minute for me.
Yes.
But most importantly, this version of George Bailey, this Brody character, has a pitched and bitter rivalry with the living embodiment of runaway American capitalism. The mayor who will not close the beaches for anything, no matter how many people will die.
Yes,
And of course, Brody's ending is remarkably similar to George Bailey's in It's a Wonderful Life, if somewhat more literal here. Where George Bailey he doesn't have any money, so everyone comes in and chips in money and they help him and he saves the business and everyone's life.
Yes.
Here, Brody's friend gather round and makes tremendous sacrifices for him, but it's a little grosser.
A little bit.
Hooper goes down in the cage to benefit the group and make sure, some of them survive.
Yeah.
And of course, Quint dies in that final fight against the shark. But when we leave Brody, his perspective has irrevocably changed about the ocean, about life and death.
Yes.
It's that same sense of moral growth that we have in It's a Wonderful Life, where he's this evolved and fundamentally grateful man as the credits start to roll.
Yeah, he comes out of it a changed, a different person. Yeah, a better person than he was before.
It's a very happy ending. Not for Quint.
Not for the shark.
Everyone else. No, not for the shark.
Not so much for the shark. I mean, I agree with you there, but I think that Jaws does take a slightly more cynical turn.
Okay.
And this is where, so I'll back up. I got to thinking about this because I was thinking about the colors in this movie and looking at the poster. There's like the main colors of this movie are red, white, and blue, right? Red for the blood, obviously. And of course, white for, the
great white shark.
The white shark, and the sky and the clouds and the boat and the sand, the white sand beaches, and of course blue for the sky and the water, right? Like these are the main colors of the movie. Watch it back, you'll totally see that I'm right. But of course, those are the colors of the American flag.
Right.
And this movie centers around the 4th of July. And so we're thinking about America and patriotism and good old American capitalism, right? Like bring in the tourists, come on in, bring money to the island, right? And so, and a very, I think, easy and valid interpretation of this movie is that the ultimate villain in this movie is capitalism and greed, right? It's the greed of the mayor who refuses to close the beaches, and it's only the goodness of the heart of Brody for caring about the lives of everybody and saying
the building and loan.
Yeah, who cares about the money? Exactly,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
But I think it also there's a complication here, because what I noticed while watching this time compared to all the other times I watched this is in the scene where everybody first kind of starts to freak out and asks, are we going to close the beaches? One person, I think it's the woman in there, she says like she's worried about her like bed and breakfast, her inn, right? And like if we close the beaches, people aren't going to come to the island, which means nobody's going to come to my inn, and I'm not going to make it through the summer. And like, yeah, that's still a capitalist problem, but like if you think about it in terms of like local businesses, that's people's livelihood.
Right.
And like of course, people dying takes precedence over people's businesses succeeding. But it's not just that the mayor wants his own personal money. There's the real human cost of if like our whole summer season is ruined, like we're going to all be on welfare at the end of the year. And like, that's going to really ruin local businesses. And so it's not just as simple as money is bad, saving people is good. It's a little bit complicated.
Being a beach town is not late stage capitalism.
Right.
It's the refusal to close it after people start dying.
Right.
That's
the
critique part. Yeah.
But I think this can go a step further when you're thinking about, okay, what is Brody fighting? Because like I said earlier, he's sort of going through this moral dilemma about how do I save this community, but also just like tackling his own fears and doubts about himself and his capabilities. And that's something that's similar in this movie and It's a Wonderful Life. It's how do I, an American man, live up to the American capitalist standards of what it means to be a man? I'm a good husband, a good father. I provide for my family.
You're a protector.
Right? I'm a protector. Exactly. Right. And that's like the biggest thing that Brody grapples with in this movie is that he can't protect his family. He's afraid of going on the water. He doesn't know how to hunt down a shark. He doesn't know how to be a cop in this town compared to New York, and it's very confusing and weird. He wants to make a difference. Like that's why he came to this island instead of in New York, because he says like being a cop in New York, you feel like you're not doing anything because
there's so much more.
The crime never ends, right? But here you can actually make a difference. So he wants to do that. That's his motivation, but he's like doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know how to keep his family safe. He doesn't know how to do his job well. No one's listening to him. And it almost like veers into this sense of individualism. Like, yes, he cares about keeping the community safe, but I think like he doesn't become truly motivated to really take that step and do something about it until his own son almost dies.
Interesting.
And it's when there's that attack in the pond, his son is not attacked by the shark, but just randomly passes out from shock. And then that's when
you.
Well, yes, right. And so that's when he's like, "Oh, I've got to do something," even though a child has already died and a woman has already died, and like but I mean,
it's abstract until it's personal.
Exactly, and that's a totally like I'm not like critiquing him like. That's understandable. Like, of course, if it hits you personally, you're going to have a stronger desire to do something. But he's leaning into that individualism. And so I think it. And so then in the end, it's him tackling this and taking it on and saving his individual family, his own best interests. And him killing the shark becomes him like battling with his own self. And rather because the end of It's a Wonderful Life is about going beyond your own self-interest and caring for your community and the people around you, right? And like if George Bailey wanted to like, I think if he did the Brody route, he would have moved his family away from Bedford Falls and been successful in New York. Like,
interesting.
Ernie, what's his name, offered. And they would have had this really nice house, and his kids' college would have been paid for, and like he could have done that. But instead, he stays in Bedford Falls and relies on his community and the same way they rely on him. And so here, I think, you know, I don't know what alternative ending we could do here to have that more morally straightforward, you know, optimistic, hopeful, morally centered way of doing things. But I guess it would have been like him, like getting everybody on board with him. I don't know, like working with the mayor or working with the local businesses or something in order to, like, maybe, like, I don't know, raising a fund to, like, maybe like any money that he makes from killing the shark, he gives back to the community for all the days the beaches had to be closed. You know, maybe something like that.
The confrontations he has with the dead kid's mother and some of the other scenes and interactions he has with his constituents as police chief, those broaden his perspective. And I would argue that by the time he's out there at the end with the other two guys hunting the shark, he's not just killing the shark to protect his own son. I think by the end it is an effort to protect the community.
I definitely think you're right.
He grows into that George Bailey aspirational character by the end of things, but I agree that maybe he doesn't start there.
And I'm not trying to say that, like, the ending of Jaws is bad and morally wrong. Like, I'm my point. I think the way the arc of this movie is excellent, and the way it ends is great, and I love the personal individual struggle, but it feels like less of a underhanded / not so subtle socialist message than It's a Wonderful Life does.
I mean, they both come to the same point and the same political recommendation, but also that hyper-capitalist expectation that you talked about earlier does demand individualism and demonize community.
Yes.
So yes, these two personal stories of men grappling with and ultimately rebelling against that expectation must engage those ideas in that way.
Yeah.
So I think you're totally right in that comparison.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I have sort of one question here, but before that, I do want to say that my favorite part of rewatching this movie was when Maggie demanded we turn on the subtitles for Quint.
Oh my gosh, I can't. I was like, I'm trying so hard. I can't understand a word this man is saying. It's like he's like definitely drunk on screen and has a weird accent and just says weird things.
Did you know?
I was struggling. I was fighting for my life.
Robert Shaw, the actor who played Quint, did you know he's British?
No. Well, that makes a lot more sense.
He was like a big Shakespearean actor.
I had no idea.
Working in Stratford. He was Henry VIII in a huge production.
That's very cool. I love that.
And then he, did this and died of alcohol poisoning.
That's rough.
But incredible performance. The other thing
great.
is me recognizing you, just because I know you so well, watching you imprint on Hooper as we watch this movie and realizing that it's because he's Riley from National Treasure. Because Maggie cannot live without her curious, nice science sidekick boys.
Oddly enough, Hooper didn't. I didn't really imprint on him in my previous feelings of watching this. I was like, he's the real hero of this story. He's saving the community with his knowledge of science.
He's a good boy.
Knowledge can be our key.
Also, he had the integrity to never sign up for a sequel.
He was also just incredibly passionate. Like, it's not just, he wasn't just coming in and being like, well, actually, I know all about sharks. He was like, emphatically like, this is not the shark that killed the kid.
Yes.
I will tell you how to kill it. And like, I have all this experience, like, finding sharks and working with them. Like, he was like very smart, very capable, very passionate. And I like that he just came in with his little denim jacket and his little beanie,
and
looking like a 2014 hipster.
He wore a tie while doing a shark autopsy. When he knew stuff was going to blow around everywhere, he still wore the tie.
Can I also mention there were a surprising number of turtleneck sweaters in this movie that takes place in July on the beach. I was very confused by that.
Yeah, Brody looked like a Bond villain.
I was like, is that just a 70s thing where everybody was wearing too many clothes? Like, I feel like until like 2001, everybody was just wearing way too many clothes all the time.
Well, remember the Sopranos thing. A Don doesn't wear shorts. All men see themselves as Tony Soprano, so yes, we must live up to that expectation.
I suppose so.
My final question to wrap this up. Why is Jaws the only good shark movie? What is the X factor that has made every successive sharky horror movie terrible?
Well, I think most of the other ones make the mistake of showing the shark too much.
Yes. And I have different I don't know the answer here, but
I say that like having seen maybe one or two other shark horror movies, because I know they're not good.
But yes, especially modern shark movies, the focus is always on lifeless, weightless CGI.
Yes.
Or the dummy that doesn't look as good. Now, the shark here looks fine because you barely see it.
Right. It's not when you see like pictures of it, you're like, oh yeah, that's not very good.
Yeah, it's wiggling and rubber and all that kind of thing. It's
very fake, yeah. But the way they've used it here is very expertly. It's very good.
So you could say it's the way they handle the sharks. You could also say not all shark movies have Spielberg at the helm.
Well, there is that.
So of course,
or John Williams scoring it,
right?
Yeah.
Or the script that we talked about, the way the cast is balanced, those defined roles, the chemistry, the interplay between them is so engaging, even before you get to the monster. But I think it's also the realism. Because the other shark movies I've seen, they get so stylized and grim dark
they do.
to try to make you scared. But the thing that's really creepy about Jaws, and I think the thing that made billions of people avoid the water, is the realism. It's
right. It's so grounded.
It's shot with natural colors and what looks to be natural light.
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly than those other two things, everyone on screen looks like a normal person.
Yeah, they do.
They all look kind of old. They all look kind of leathery and kind of screwed up and normal.
Their hair is awful. Everyone has awful hair.
They're not endlessly beautiful and perfect.
It's not
and
Blake
manicured.
Lively on screen. Yeah.
Right.
I'm just thinking that one movie she was in. Yeah.
But I think that realism really makes a difference in horror like this. And
I agree. In a horror movie like this, yeah. I love a good stylized horror movie. Like, do not get me wrong. But
sure.
I think for this, when it's about a very real fear, a very real thing that does and can happen and will continue to happen, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I don't know what the X factor is, and I want to throw that as a question to people watching on YouTube or people listening on Patreon. Throw that in the comments.
Yeah.
What do you think? What is the reason that Jaws is the only good shark movie ever made?
Yes.
Please let us know.
I would love to know. Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for joining us for another Summerween episode.
Yeah, this was episode 5 for this year.
We have one more?
I think we have
one more.
About one more. I think we're going to go through the end of August. Remember, we're only doing these every other week because on the other Fridays we do our Witcher coverage where we're going through chapter by chapter the Witcher books. We're on the last novel, Lady of the Lake. We're getting near the end of that one. So check us out next week for that.
Also, as a little plug, apart from the YouTube and the Patreon, this past Tuesday we put out an episode on Barbie. And this is me passionately arguing that the Barbie movie is a gorgeous, perfect, subversive, challenging, accurate, faithful retelling of John Milton's Paradise Lost, and that Ryan Gosling's Ken is the best Miltonian Satan I've ever seen on screen.
Yeah, it is fun. We occasionally drop other episodes on Tuesdays too, so that's what we did this week. I don't think I've said this. We did not invent the term Summerween, and we are not claiming to have invented it. I just want to make that clear.
Sure.
I've heard other people use it for other types of summer horror related series. I think I first heard it from, was it not Books and Lala, Reads-a-Latte. Somebody
it's $1 million idea.
Somebody on YouTube. I will link it.
I'm glad you're giving credit.
I just want to make sure we did. No, it's like we did not invent the word Summerween. I just want to make that clear. We're not claiming to, and that's not us.
Sure.
I figured it was a public domain term, so we're using it.
A word this stupid is shared amongst the people.
Yes, right. It is not just us. Yeah, we're
cool.
a podcast for the people, if nothing else.
All right. We'll see you very soon with new episodes. Please check out the Patreon and join us on our journey as we continue a march through a discussion of every fascinating work of art ever made.
We'll get there one day.
We will.
One day we'll have done it all.
Bye.
Bye.